Still warm?
No, air conditioner works fine.
Let's cool it off a little bit.
Who did that?
Mike. Okay. On behalf of the Hazard School Board of Education, I'd like to welcome Robert Howe to our district. Mr. Howe is currently the superintendent of the Leslie Public Schools. I'd like to take a few moments to describe the format for this interview.
Thank you.
The interview will take about it's been approximately 90 minutes. The candidate, Mr. Howe, will have an opportunity at the end to make a statement to the board if he chooses and ask the board any questions that you may want answered. And the interview is being taped by TV 25 and will be aired this weekend, and there's a schedule posted on TV station 25. We are not going to have any audience questions today, but we ask the audience to fill out the candidate evaluation forms, and they can either do the ones that are available on the side or the ones that are available on our website at hazlet.k12.mi.us. And you can find them under the superintendent search and just click the assessment forms. Those forms will electronically sent to Cheryl. Otherwise, turn your forms back into to Cheryl, the board secretary. Reminder that we, the board, are legally responsible to hire the next superintendent. We are not asking for a recommendation for hiring. We'd rather have your input on the strengths and concerns you have with the candidate. Remember that your forms must be signed because they become part of the public record. Okay, with that, I'll start with the first question for Mr. Howe. While the board has had an opportunity to review your vita, the audience hasn't, and we'd like you to take a moment to briefly review your educational background and your employment history so that people can know where you're coming from.
Okay, sure, it'll be my pleasure. I grew up not very far from here, beautiful downtown Bath, Michigan, back in a time when we were of almost equal size. That has changed considerably. Went from there to Central Michigan University, received my bachelor's degree in science and physical education. Went into to teach in St. Clair Shores for a year, coached basketball, taught biology, 7th grade science. Went to Midland for 5 years, and while I was in Midland, achieved my master's degree in secondary administration, and also coached there, taught 9th grade biology, 7th grade science, coached both football and basketball. And at age, I think, 29, whatever, 6 years into education, became an assistant principal in Eaton Rapids. At that time, the intermediate school was a 7, 8, 9 school, had nearly 900 students in it, and I was the only assistant principal, and that was, there's some stories to tell there. From there, I went to Williamston and served a stint as principal of Williamston Middle School for about 9 years. After that, spent 6 years out of education, started Okemos Printing Center at the corner of Okemos and Jolly Road, and also ran my auction business and commercial properties. Went back into education in 1991, served as principal of Plainwell Middle School for 5 years, came to Leslie about 8 years ago as middle school principal for a year, became middle school, high school principal for 2.5, became superintendent for the last 4+ years, not quite a half, but I officially started in February of 2000. During the time I was in Plainwell, and we're getting some feedback here.
Yeah.
These mics are way too hot.
Let's see if it gets better.
It was supposed to be the seat, not the mic. During the times that I was in Kalamazoo and in Eaton Rapids, and obviously since have taken class at Michigan State University and Western, and of course attended a variety of symposiums and seminars and those sorts of things to keep up. So that's kind of a brief history. We'll go from there.
Okay.
Good. Mr. Allen, I'll ask the second question. Hazlet prides itself on being a progressive district. Tell us about how you have worked with others to develop new creative ideas to advance learning opportunities for children.
Well, I think the most demonstratable piece probably comes from before I was a superintendent. And we've done some things as a superintendent, but when I came to Leslie, they were going to move into their new high school. And that gave an opportunity for the middle school, which was a 5, 6, 7 building in an old 2-story building that hadn't had any renovations in years and years. And so they knew they were going to move to the old high school that had some renovations being done. And the board indicated that they'd like to see something happen at the middle school. And it was a beautiful match of the skills that I had at that particular time and the motivations of the board and the staff to come together and in 1 year's time completely change the program from a hour-by-hour bell-ringing junior high school to a very progressive middle school that now we receive people who come to us to look at our program. We not only instituted team teaching, team planning, advisor-advisee programs, related arts including computers and language, Spanish, speech, art, all of those things, I mean, and more were incorporated into the program. It all happened in 1 year. It was, I arrived in the middle of August, and because folks were interested in our skills, my skills matched their needs, and people were motivated, we were able to work as a team, move forward, and make what people say is a 3 to 5 year change happen in 1 year, which is why the nomination for the principal award that you read about in the resume. As a superintendent, I'm proud of a lot of things. One of the things that I'm most proud of is my involvement with the foundation. The foundation at the time had been in existence for some maybe 8 or 9 years. It was a fledgling organization. It typically raised less than $5,000 a year. They did some mini grants. And I'll simply take credit of knowing the right people and how to put people together. And I knew Glenn Girard. Some of you may know Glenn. He consults with educational foundations. He used to be with Dan McCormick in Williamston. And I talked to him and was able to pull together a coalition of a local manufacturer, our school board, and the foundation, each pitching in money to bring that man in for a year of consulting. And we learned so much, and it became much more than a PTO. There's over nearly $250,000 in endowment now. We've given away, I don't know, $100,000. Our latest project on the boards, we met with the architects yesterday, is a one-room schoolhouse at our wild 100 acres. I've already built a shelter there, added a stage extension at the high school ball field for the girls, a new site, a number of other computer room in the middle school. All those things have happened in the last 4 years. And that's the result of bringing people together, the right sets of people with the right sets of motivations. And so I really see my role as a catalyst and to help make those things happen. You can't do anything alone. You can't get too far ahead of the crowd. But if you have some experience in bringing people together, you can get a lot of things done.
Mr. Howe, can you give us some examples where you have had several things that needed to be done at the same time, and they were of equal importance, and how have you handled that?
Equal. Well, let me speak more philosophically. I'm not coming on a particular example at the moment, but let me speak more in terms of my work style. Typically, if there are a number of things that need to be done, well, maybe I could give you a recent example. We just, you're well aware that we had our elementary school flooded. I learned of that at 5 o'clock in the morning, and we have a way to call off school, and I have some responsibilities in that. My secretary has some responsibilities. Her phone didn't work, so I took that on. I got to school at 7 o'clock. I began to assess the situation and knew that we were not going to be able to handle that alone, and put into process bringing in disaster recovery people, and knowing we had to talk to those people, and also knowing I had to talk to the board. So I gave responsibility of letting the board know through my secretary. My maintenance director and I interviewed disaster recovery people. At the same time, I naively said to one of my administrators, I said, pull the administrative team together. We need to put together a contingency plan in case we're likely to be out of school for a couple of days. That was the naive part. But put them to work, they put themselves to work, and we're working on a plan while I was helping interview disaster recovery people. I had the board president in, and one other board member dropped in, told them the magnitude after we knew what it was going to cost, what we needed to do, what our emergency powers were, but I really wanted the two of us to talk to all the board members because it was going to be expensive. As a matter of fact, cleanup was going to be somewhere between $125,000 and $150,000. Superintendent can typically, by policy, spend that in an emergency case, but you don't do it without board support. So my board president is calling board members, I'm calling board members, we're making that decision while my administrative staff is working on a plan. We met at 4 o'clock that afternoon. We, until about 6, that plan was in place. We met Monday morning with the teachers, went to work. So, by example, what was the most important thing to do there? Well, we needed to mitigate damages. We had to make sure that we didn't have that dampness stay there, or that we would have mold, that sort of thing. So that had to be taken care of right away. But we had to have a plan for children. We had to make sure that we got them back in school somehow. And right now, very successfully, our kindergarten, first grade is in our high school. And our 2nd through 4th grade is in our middle school. We held a board meeting last Monday night, right before the plan was to be instituted. Every parent was called by their teacher. That was part of the plan devised. Every parent was called. They knew what was, where the buses, how the walkers were going to get from there to wherever. They knew everything. We did not have a single, not one parent at that board meeting. So to me, all of those parts working together, I don't, equal importance, they are all important. The educational plan for the children, the taking care of the building, to make sure the board was properly advised, to make sure that the parents were properly informed, all of those were of importance. And it's about working as a team. And we've developed a team in Leslie that is second to only Hazlitt's.
Thank you.
How many kindergartners were there in protest of having to go to school?
Never were they in protest, nor were their teachers. I think the only protest came from a few high school students who wondered why on Friday and Monday that the little kids got to stay home and they had to go to school.
Of course. Thank you.
Mr. Howe, I have the next question. Could you give us some examples of how your work experiences have qualified you for this position?
Well, I believe that I have served in the education arena for more than an adequate period of time, which has allowed me a number of experiences that many my junior would not have had. In this year, for example, we had some difficult negotiations with teachers. We had a situation of a false accusation of criminal sexual conduct. We had the flood. All of those kinds of experiences, and that's just 1 year in my lengthy career as an administrator. I was a teacher for 6 years and been an administrator ever since, except for the 6 years I took out in the business community. So, and I believe that the experiences running a printing company, running an auction business, bring me a unique set of perspectives to the school. Many people are inbred. I was inbred. But going out and actually doing the work of a small business person and understanding the trials that they need and their needs, and understanding what partnership is. A partnership isn't about a school taking from, why don't you give us these computers for our room? It's about what can we also do, as a partnership is about give and take. So examples of experiences, they're numerous. I could go on a long time. I think I've given the highlights of some of that. Give you at least a sense of it.
Thank you.
Mr. Howe, you're probably surprised we've waited for the fifth question to talk about revenues, or budgets, because that's obviously a major topic in education today. As a sitting superintendent, I know you were probably heavily involved with the development of a budget in the Leslie area. Could you tell us what your major goals and objectives are when you establish those budgets as far as currently in Leslie? Or if in Hazlet, if I assume they'd be similar?
Well, I mean, first of all, budgets in schools are about children. And so sometimes we get caught up in numbers and we forget that those numbers represent what we do to and with and for children. And so in the back of everything has to be the driving force of how does this decision affect the children in this community. And those are sometimes, when put in that context, it makes some of the choices easier and some of them very difficult. You are a larger district than we are. You have a larger foundation grant, and we're in pretty good stead. In the 4 years that I've been there, our fund balance has doubled. Actually more than doubled, in a very tough environment. And that has not been at the sacrifice of programs overall. There was one piece with the board's approval that we did put in place, and that was that federal programs, outsourced funded programs, had to be paid for by those programs, that they were not going to be funded by general fund monies. And so that did involve, 3 years ago, the elimination of one of our programs. But other than that, we have been able to maintain fairly well. We had the pleasure of that $200 bump 3 years ago. I don't think, you probably didn't see that, but we did. And so that was sacked away. Well, so our fund balance at the end of last year was $2.1 million. Now, in the context of children, may I go on for just a moment to talk about methodology? Mm-hmm. It's a very inclusive process. In working with the finance director, what we basically have done in the past is taken this year's program and projected the cost for next year, and then taken a look at revenues and see how they match. That puzzle, if you will, is taken to a group which is an advisory group that I call together, and it involves 2 teachers from each building, a custodian rep, a cook, a secretary, a bus driver, both union presidents, 3 board members, the administrators. We have 25 people sitting around the table. And we present the problem. And this last year, the administrative team had worked on a number of things, what we could do to address the problem. Our board had agreed to fund $400,000 in fund equity next year to help offset the costs. And we needed to find, at that time, I think $175,000. We needed to eliminate from the budget. What we ended up doing, we evaluated, we had all the things that the administrators put on, and then from the floor, anyone, we added to it. Everything was honored. At the second meeting, I made, to expedite matters, I made some suggestions. These things may be unreasonable to do right away. These might need more research. These are all viable. Can we agree on that? All consensus process? Usually in 3 years, but this year in 3 years, usually in 3 meetings, this year in 2 meetings, we came to a consensus on a balanced budget. And it's clear to that group at the beginning of the meeting that I do not abdicate my responsibility to the board to recommend a budget, but that's the process that I use by which to get the greatest number of ideas by which to solve that puzzle. Of course, the board finance committee, I should preliminary to those meetings, I meet with the board finance committee to get the parameters. I had parameters. I mean, I didn't have to go look for, $575,000. I only needed to go look for $175,000 because those parameters had been set by the board finance committee prior to those meetings.
Thank you.
And if somebody thinks if I go too long, just do this,
No.
or get the cane out, or.
No, you're doing good.
Okay, just to follow up a little bit on that, I didn't hear you mention, during a period of declining revenue, which is, you mentioned the bump, which, you're right, we didn't see any bumps, but during a period of declining enrollment, which we have a little bit of here in Hazlet, explain how you would determine what priorities you would use or to reallocate resources as a result of that decline.
Well, I don't automatically assume that we're going to have to cut because there's 2 sides to that formula. The one side is declining enrollment and apparently declining revenue. But we have another opportunity for revenue, and that's school of choice. Now, philosophically, I don't like the plate that's been laid in front of us, but I'm probably one of the best at playing that game. I know how to market a school district. Our school district, in the middle of nowhere, has gone in during my term from about, I think I have the figures exactly, from about 70 students to 142 in basically 3 years, because I had no effect on the first year. And so it's doubled. Well, when you bring more children into the district, what has happened, our in-district enrollment has gone down. Our school of choice has gone up. And so that's what has helped us, is that you have to sell the district. It's difficult to be a business person in an environment that's always been nice to your neighbor. And it has to be a board decision whether they want to go that way. Our board knew in order for us to survive, to achieve the financial, we needed to work on the revenue side because we didn't have a lot of places. We believed in children, wanted to provide the programs that they deserve, and so had to go after revenue. I think in very slang terms, the whole concept sucks. But it is the game, the hand that we've been dealt, and so if that's what we've been dealt, let's go after it. And I know how to do that. And that's what we did. And, I'm not avoiding the cut part, but the cut part, if there is, and there has every year been that equation, the methodology has been with the best advice of the team, and that advice can come from anyone. It can come from the custodial representative, from high school principal, from a board member, from whomever. So if we have to look at program and prioritize, we look at that as a group to see what the impact is in the district, how many children it impacts, to what extent, all of those kinds of issues.
Okay. Back to that team of 25 or thereabouts, you said, right? Is that the team you're referring to?
Right.
Okay.
Understand that the team, the administrative team has done nearly in excess of 50 hours of work before that team ever meets to make sure that all of our data is accurate, that we have a good sense of what the savings may or may not be, a good sense of, so that we can supply data to the team, the larger team, that's accurate and represents what is, not what could be or whatever, but actually represents the impact.
Mr. Howe, what is your philosophy and your experience with the collective bargaining process?
My philosophy, bottom line, is win-win. It's not win-lose. My experience is relatively extensive. When I was in Midland, I was the chair of the negotiations committee for the teachers union in Midland, and that's a while ago when teachers unions were at their onset and setting some of the parameters that we have to deal with today. So now I've turned code, I'm on the other side, and my experience as a superintendent 4 years ago, the chief negotiator for the teachers and I met maybe 5 or 6 times, maybe spent a total of 20 hours, and we negotiated a 3-year contract. And went out for a beer afterwards. We were done. It was done out of mutual respect and an understanding that we both had goals and we both worked through it very well. At the beginning of this year, knowing of the financial difficulties that we were facing, I offered to the local union president that we could come together, extend the contract for 1 year, see where the chips fall financially, and make maybe some minor changes in the language if they wanted to do that. I encouraged that in August and in September, and we didn't get anywhere with that, so they went to the formal process, and I think it was December or January, and my name was on a lot of placards. I'm not the chief negotiator, wasn't the chief negotiator at that time, but one of the tactics that the MEA uses is to try to divide the board and the superintendent. Our board was very solid, knew what we needed to do, was always informed, and we did resolve the contract in February.
Mr. Howe, Superintendent, what do you see as your role in promoting student achievement, and what efforts have you made to ensure this is a reality in your school district?
Well, the reference as the primary instructional leader in a district goes without saying. Yet, that I believe in order to do that correctly, you hire the right people. You've already hired Sharon Jones to direct that. Her reputation in this, around here, this county, the state, is second to none. You hire the right people, and you let them do their job. You make sure that they have the tools to do their job, and so all the way through whatever she has to do, or the principals, or on to the teachers with the proper professional development, all of that has to be supported in one fashion or another. In order to lead that charge, one has to do it in a collaborative sense. We all know that that's the primary, that's why we're here, that's why we exist. It's about the achievement of our children in all the aspects, not just a narrow one, but all of the aspects of their development as children, not just academic, but that's obviously why we were primarily organized.
Mr. Howe, could you give some examples of the appropriate role or the potential opportunity for technology to enhance student learning?
Would you repeat the first part of that question?
Either give some examples of the appropriate role or the potential possibilities or the opportunity for technology to enhance student instruction or student learning.
Well, first of all, I think this is probably, the potential is probably in many school districts a very untapped potential. It's not tapped nearly enough. We have the equipment, but we haven't necessarily integrated instruction that matches the equipment and the potential of what we have in front of us. We've not, our teachers, the teachers are coming out today have a better understanding of how to utilize the technology in instruction. And we've done a lot, I think, collectively in the state and across the nation to look for professional development to bring the rest of our staff along. I think the potential is huge, and it really is going to take continued professional development to reach that potential. There correspondence between teachers in regarding lessons, correspondence with youngsters doing research that they used to do in books and can do on the internet, and can begin to enter in a dialogue with someone else in California or wherever, a dialogue about that particular topic or that particular problem that is attempting to be solved. We have to be careful, in my opinion, not to become so focused on the equipment that we lose the people in the middle. Because we know whether if we communicate through email or face-to-face or on the telephone isn't the end-all. It's what transmits the ideas back and forth. And so the potential is about the transfer of ideas with a greater population.
And following that up then, how would you evaluate whether your technology usage has been effective?
Well, I think you have to first of all, you have to determine how it all starts with data. You have to determine how the technology is being used, and then whatever objective criteria you can provide to see if the use of that technology is making a difference in test scores or whatever it is you use as your evaluation tool. But you have to use data. And sometimes, I think it's not unreasonable to say that some school districts have invested a lot of money in technology that sat there and collected dust, and they thought they had their technology whipped. It's not about the equipment, it's how you use it.
Mr. Howe, athletics and co-curricular activities are very important to our community and to our students. Please share with us your philosophy and priorities of both.
Well, I was in high school, I was in student leadership, senior class president, yearbook editor, captain of the football team, was a quarterback, ran the track team, played in the band, and I believe that the fact that I participated in those activities helped make me who I am today. I honestly, if you had just stuck a book in front of my face when I was 16, I wouldn't be here. Again, when you're 16 or 17, I went to college. I wanted to be a football coach. I mean, that was it. I went to college, was there a semester as a phys ed major and a science minor. After a semester, switched it. Phys ed was not enough academically challenging to me, but it was all of those activities that got me to school. I wouldn't have, I've been, I don't know what I've been doing, but it was involved in those kinds of activities. And we have to think not only about academic success, because we have to think about quality of life for our children. It's about the arts. It's about going to the Wharton Center. It's about listening to the rock band. It's about marching or twirling or the myriad of things that we do. I obviously enjoy sports. I coach sports. I'm not a sports nut. I've got season tickets to MSU football. And so that's an advantage to those of you who are Michigan fans, because I have tickets when they're here. But I can't imagine too many of you are Michigan fans, no? Always one. Not one? Not one.
They wouldn't dare speak.
You want a good board. Well, see, I was trying to cover my political bases.
You're very selective here.
That's good. That's good. So I have a very strong interest in supporting co-curricular, and the traditions you have in the arts with one ratings forever in your vocal program and your band program, and obviously your teams have been very successful, your sports teams, and I would be highly supportive of that, because I believe academic achievement is obviously essential, but achievement across the board is what makes us the people we are. We learn, about teamwork very early in life when we're part of the corral. It's about doing it together, that sort of thing.
What experiences have you had working with special needs students?
Probably the most experience I had was that as a principal. When I was in Plainwell, we had an autistic classroom in our school. We had a basic classroom in our school. We had a EMI program in our school. And so, aside from those that would be mainstreamed, we had those that were not. And those programs have unique needs. And that was a great experience for me. I probably learned more than I was able to give to that situation. And developed a friendship with a young man who came to school every day in a wheelchair, who could not speak, who could only move his head, who had a nurse 100% of the time, and was able to develop a relationship with that young man. When he left 8th grade and we had a little honors, it was interesting. I had a principal's award for the child who probably most of our 8th graders didn't really know, but had to work harder at school than any other kid. And then he had an award for me. It was just that sort of, and so I learned a lot in that regard. I understand the law, but there are people who understand it better than I, and I assume that you have a special ed director that's very competent, and I rely on my special ed director to keep me headed in the right direction.
Have you ever been involved in developing any alternative methods to deliver services?
My very first experience as administrator in Eaton Rapids, I was assistant principal, and that is back when Section 48 grants were written, some 200 years ago. And probably nobody in this room is old enough to remember that. Well, maybe Carl, but and was responsible and took the initiative and wrote that grant for the first alternative program in Eaton Rapids. So started that program. I must say that alternative programming has come a long way since then. I had the opportunity to visit your school last week, and I was just blown away with what Greg shared with me. I think you have, I would say, the premier alternative school that I've ever seen, and I've been in a few, and that I've ever heard of. The kinds of programs that you're involved in there across the board, and the variety of those programs and the needs that you meet of those young people just it's incredible. And the fact that you are now looking at the other end, so you're looking at this end and catching them before they get out, and you're looking at the front end with the 3 to 5 year program. I mean, you've got the whole thing covered. It's to your credit, and to the credit of Bob and his staff.
Thank you.
Mr. Howe, this is sort of a lengthy question, and I've had trouble asking it every time, so bear with me. Have you ever been in a situation in which your knowledge of a student's needs and your knowledge of the capabilities of the district would lead to a unique and beneficial action for the student? Would you like me to
My pause is similar to others.
Everyone.
Believe me, I did not write this question.
Okay.
But I'm going to rewrite it here sometime soon.
Okay.
Okay. Would you like me to read it again?
I would, because what I thought I heard seemed contradictory in a sense.
Have you ever been in a situation in which your knowledge of a student's needs and your knowledge of the capabilities of the district led to a unique and highly beneficial action for the student or students?
Oh, well, yeah, that's fair. I was going to say, well, the simple answer is no, but that's...
I heard that too.
I think the example that I just gave you, I think that the example of the alternative program was trying to meet the needs. We were having, when I went to Eaton Rapids as an assistant principal, the very first semester, we suspended over 490 children from school. When Dan and I left, Dan Bird, who became a superintendent, and I went on to become a principal in Williamston, left, the last semester we had 3 suspensions in a semester. Well, we addressed it in a variety of ways, but one of the ways that the student needs, those students' needs were not being met in that setting, and that was where the alternative program came from. Now, I'm not going to say that it was the most successful alternative program that ever existed, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. You learn and you move forward. But that was a result of understanding that the needs were there and looking for ways to solve that problem.
Thank you.
Sort of a similar question, only this has more to do not with the students but with your staff. Can you give us any examples or some examples of how you personally have impacted the knowledge, the skills, or the practices of your employees to help and to grow within your district?
Mm-hmm. You know, a very easy example is what I have done with, and I say we collectively make this decision, but our administrative meetings usually start with a small learning. And this last year we used a book, I think it was called Monday Morning Leadership. Just a small book, fairly simple, a lot of ideas that we needed to be reminded of. And so each of us took a portion, and we took 10 minutes at the beginning of the meeting and led a small discussion in that regard. That's a simple example of maintaining professional development amongst our staff. Obviously, we have Another aspect has been, and Sharon and I kind of talked about your administrative retreat here and how I started administrative retreats in Leslie that hadn't been there before. Usually it was 2 days. We usually went away. And a component of that always had a learning piece to it. There was a planning piece, there was a number of different, but there was always a learning piece. I don't know if you're familiar with Barb Ruga, brought her in terms of IDPs and teacher evaluation. And so we had a half a day of that sort of development. And each year we picked, this last year was CPR for administrators. That was part of it. Obviously, well, not obvious to you, obvious to me, our curriculum director, who's now our assistant superintendent for instructional services, oversaw professional development for teachers. So we would collaborate and work with teachers in terms of their development and what they needed, what the district needed in relationship to our goals.
Mr. Howe, you've referred to your board as very cohesive and supportive. What was your methodology for establishing that kind of relationship?
I would say communication. It is about, and I don't think, I'm not going to say that there's never been anything but a 7-0 vote, because I don't know that for absolute truth, but that's 99% true. And the reason is that the board and superintendent work on issues, and nothing makes it to this table in a public meeting unless it's figured out. The board agenda is set by the president typically and the superintendent, and it's just not going to be there. And so that's communication. It's communication through committee structure. It's communication with the letter I send home every Friday. It's communication with email now. I had to get my board to a point, and just finally this year we have changed our policies that allowed me to, and so now I can send them even more, communicate more frequently. It's on the phone if there's a particular issue. If we have an emergency, I make sure that each board member is called. If I can't call them personally because I'm involved in trying to, then my secretary will call, and I will have a written script for her so she knows exactly what facts are there so that it doesn't get lost in translation. So that cohesiveness comes from working together as a team. We're not on opposite sides, we're on the same side. And we have different job roles, but it's the way I look at all of the district. The custodian has a different job role than I do, but we both have to be there. The bus driver has to get them to school. I don't have a job if they don't get to school. So it's about teamwork, and that's the way I look at it with the board.
Thank you.
Mr. Howe, describe a situation in which you came with a proposal to your board or supervisor that you were very high on that was rejected, and describe what you did in that situation and why.
I came to my board in work session with a proposal by which to build a new administrative center. If you come to my district, we have a double-wide portable that's been there for 30 years. It's inadequate. It's not what happens in the public. It gets interpreted as, the superintendent's office. But in fact, we don't have the curriculum director there. We don't have the special ed director there. We don't have safe storage and so at the time I came with the idea, what I proposed was that we could bond for that building, replace it, and pay for it out of operational funds. I thought it was a good idea. And from a fiscal standpoint, we could have afforded it, even in these times, because it wasn't a lot of money. I think it was about $40,000 or $50,000 a year total to finance that bond, and it was a bond that the board could approve without voter approval. Their concern was legitimate. Their concern was that they would build that building and then 2 or 3 years later go out to the public and say, now we need our pre-K1 building, that the public would have felt like they weren't treated fairly in that process. I agree with them. They were right. At the time, I thought it was a great idea. Because the need still is still there. I mean, it was about the need. It was not about anything else. It was trying to find an alternate solution to a critical problem. And that's what, I guess I will add that now, because you should know it. If there's an issue out there, I will probably come up with 10 or 100 ways to solve it. It's just the way I think. And I don't think that every idea that I verbalize is necessarily a good one. But unless somebody's there standing to tell me it's not, and to have an intellectual dialogue about the strengths and weaknesses of a solution, I mean, that's how we get, all of us are a lot smarter than any one of us. And I know that. So if we're going to get anywhere, what I would ask of you is to at least allow me to generate the ideas, because you have to know that I know that not every one of my ideas is a good one. And that's the same thing I need to do with the administrative team. And that takes a while to develop that trust. But once that trust is there, then everything's on top of the table instead of in the parking lot, and you get to really get some vital work done because everybody's brain's engaged. They're not just depending on yours.
Mr. Howe, the superintendent is recognized leader of any school district, and as such, leading through the vision and the values of the district is imperative. Have you ever been in a situation in which you've had to redirect the activities or behaviors of others to be in accord with your district's vision and values? And how did you go about doing it?
Well, I think something that comes to mind actually was in the sports arena with some coaches who I'm a very strong believer in sportsmanship, and it's not about winning and losing. It's about playing the game, and sometimes we win those games and sometimes we lose them, and we give it the best fight. In the middle of that, we have to offer the best mentors that we possibly can. And I don't have much tolerance for those who are in charge of children and allow themselves to get so emotionally involved that they become bad examples. And so there was an occasion where I had some discussion with some coaches, and that behavior changed, and changed immediately, but it was a matter of laying down, and it didn't have to be a district philosophy necessarily, and I guess, whatever, it had to be done. And I am never afraid to step to the line to support that which the district believes in or that which is right, because ultimately we have to do what is right.
Mr. Howe, the next question deals with building infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And describe your experience in new construction, renovation, and building maintenance.
Well, I'd like to describe that I was more immersed into it right now. We, in September, as you are probably aware, we had a bond proposal that was defeated. You can always look back and think about the things that you could have done differently. I know that my 70 and 80 hours a week, I have the feeling now that it probably wouldn't have made any difference at all what we did. I think we were, although bond issues have passed, I think in our community the uncertainty of the economy and some of the other kinds of issues played into it. There are some other things that our board and our community committee would change, I think. So I've been through that part of the process. I was in the process as the middle school principal, assigned as high school principal. I opened Leslie High School in 1997 as the principal. Well, in the time period when we opened in September 15th or 25th or whatever it was that year, from the time that I was assigned as principal, which would have probably been June, I was integrally involved with that building and its opening. And so, you know, I was in the construction trailer every morning at the meeting, and all of those sorts of things, and trying to integrate not only what needed to be from construction, but how we were going to get school opened and still have it open for another 4 months while we had workmen finishing work. So I've had that experience. Maintenance, I can speak of from a philosophical standpoint. And I say philosophical because you have to start from that, but that moves to action. If you go to my district, I would invite you to come to my district at any time, and anytime you go by that highway, you look over and you say, there's a great school. That's a great school. The grounds there are no weeds there, nothing. The mechanicals in that building, all 7 years later, we've replaced motors, we've done what we had to. Every building is as far as, I asked the maintenance director this year to replace all of the flush valves in the middle school that had been there for 40 years, and the chrome had worn off and whatever. And the reason I carry that philosophy is that our taxpayers walk in those doors and have an expectation that their money is being well used. And if things are dirty, if they're in disrepair, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, they believe their money is being misused. And I really learned that from Emmett Lippy when I was in Williamston. Emmett was the superintendent, who was the superintendent at Novi. There wasn't a weed ever anywhere in that, and I always wondered, what is it about weeds? I mean, he was just intense about it. And it took me a while to figure it out, and it really makes so much sense because it is your first public relations tool, is how you keep your buildings. So I put my buildings against any. You walk in those buildings, well, don't walk in the elementary school right now, but typically you walk in those buildings, the floors shine, the bathrooms are clean, everything is up to snuff. And we have to maintain them, because if we don't maintain them, we certainly can't ask for more.
Mr. Howe, as you know, a superintendent must be an accomplished communicator. What do you think your strengths are in this area?
Well, I would just ask you how I'm doing, whether or not I'm... I think that I have strengths not only verbally, but I think I also have developed strengths in written form. And so, you know, I do that in a variety of ways. The crisis with the teacher this year, one of the things that I knew was important was to control rumor, and that wasn't going to be done by the press. So the day that teacher was arrested, that very day there was a letter from me to every parent in that district. The day he was supposed to be arraigned and it was postponed, there was a letter to every parent in that district telling them of that situation. The day he was exonerated, there was a letter to every parent in that district, because I wanted to make sure that everyone was informed. And so, and I did it in such a way, you know, I'd ask you to review the letters. I mean, here you're faced with a letter that you have to tell your public that one of your teachers has been arrested for criminal sexual conduct, and yet protect his rights and the students' rights at the same time. And I'd be happy to show you that series of letters. I think I communicate very well, very effectively in written form. I'm a collaborative writer. I self-edit quite a bit. My secretary and I go back and forth, and, you know, it's just my style, and, you know, I'll write or dictate something, and she'll give it back to me, and I'll do this, and we'll trade that back and forth about 4 or 5 times. But then I will often have, if it's a critical piece, I'll have one of my administrators take a look at it. You know, I'd have Linda, I'd have Sharon take a quick look at it. What am I missing? To make sure that we get the message out. And the verbal stuff, I guess you'll have to just evaluate right here.
Thank you.
Mr. Howe, can you give us an example in which you dealt with a difficult parent, and I'm sure you have a lot of those examples, who had a valid complaint?
No, we have no difficult parents.
Difficult parent who had a valid complaint against the district or an administrative, one of your administrators, and how'd you handle it?
Well, I think that the clue is valid. And the fallback position is you have to do what's right. And it's not about saving face, it's about doing what's right. Now, I may need to do that very delicately. But if an administrator's made a mistake, the administrator and I will talk about that mistake, and we'll talk about how he or she can make it right.
Thank you.
Joe, we haven't talked a lot here. I think you touched on it earlier on one of my other questions, however, as far as we haven't used the terminology strategic plan. Most districts have some form at one time or another of a strategic plan to help them move forward and sort of as a track to run on. Can you describe for us what steps you would use to develop a strategic plan?
Well, obviously that has to start with the district goals, because until you know where you're going, there's no path will get you there. Mm-hmm. And so I think it depends a little bit upon the culture of the district and what their past has been in terms of developing that plan. One that I might suggest would be to have the board-developed goal looked at by the administrative team, and to develop that strategy and bring it back to the board as the strategy by which we will attempt to achieve that goal. I've also seen it done with the board and administrative team together. And of course, there's a tertiary effect, because it's the goal, it's what the administrative team is going to do on its part to see that that goal is achieved, and they need to develop the plan with their school improvement teams or their faculties or whatever or if it's a different area of the district, maintenance, it's with those people. So it involves a lot of people in the bigger process.
Is there any unique way or special way that you would use to evaluate the progress of that, as far as once you've decided to go into a strategic planning mode?
I think that, to evaluate the process or evaluate the results?
The results.
You know, I think that goals need to be specific in what it is you want to do and how it is you want to measure that. And I think it becomes fairly simple to evaluate whether or not that strategy has been effective. If you say you're going to improve writing and that's going to be done, K-12, and you're going to improve it to what degree, over what period of time, in an objective sort of way, you put the strategies in place, and then you take a look at the data. Okay. Not everything is data-driven. I mean, it is data-driven, but some of it's subjective data, not always objective data.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm putting poor Phil to sleep.
No, I'm not. Strategic planning is just what I love to do.
Mr. Howe, would you give us an example or two of some collaborative interaction with your community to achieve?
I would give examples such as I brought all the ministers from the community into my office to talk about how we could work together, what their needs were, what ours were. Understanding the separation of church and state, but there are some areas that our ministers have been exceedingly helpful when we've had the death of a teacher or a death of a student, and we've invited them to show up, to be in the halls for those students who would look to them individually. That would be an example of collaboration. The work that we have done with the Chamber of Commerce. Obviously, I've been a member since I've been in the district, but been an active member, and the school has participated in chamber activities. The light parade, we enter a award-winning bus every year, and that sort of thing. So supportive of that. So we were supportive of the summer concert series. So financially, we had a little, from money that we could spend that way. It wasn't taxpayer money, pot money. The work with the civic organ. I happen to be, you saw in my resume, president of the Kiwanis Club. I helped start it in that community, and that allows more and more contact with members in the community that you wouldn't normally have. Collaboratively, we built a playground at the middle school with parents. We built a brand new playground at the elementary school. We worked, obviously through the foundation on a number of events. I personally have, because of my skills as an auctioneer, have been able to work several fundraisers. We honored a retired vocal teacher and had a little mini auction during the middle of dinner and raised, $6,000 for this towards this stage extension. Started the Blackhawk Athlete Hall of Fame 2 years ago, and do a little auction there to raise money. We've started a summer events program for middle school youngsters. Started 2 years ago. If anything, you're going to get someone who, I might just bring this to note. I don't live in Leslie. I live near the corner of Okemos and, Meridian and Grand River. So I live in the Okemos School District, about 4 miles from here. And people ask me, well, how do you get away with that? You're the superintendent of Leslie. Leslie's my community. I am there all the time. It's not about where I sleep, it's about where I participate. And that would be the same for Hazlitt. It's not that I live across the district line, it's what am I involved with? And I think that my resume shares with you the considerable activities of how I've become involved with the community. And that's an important role for superintendent. It's not the only role, but it's a very important one. By the way, I also did buy a storefront in Leslie, so then I became a taxpayer there as well. So that probably didn't hurt.
Mr. Howe, talk about what you do the first 100 days on the job, and what would you like to accomplish?
What I do the first 100 days primarily is listen. It's my understanding in talking with some of your staff and with my interpretation of your district and this board that you have an outstanding district. You're not looking, I don't believe, for a knight in shining armor to come in and change the district. You have an excellent district. Patty Lutsky said, we're looking for somebody to help us maintain our excellence. So the first thing I need to do is listen. As you can already see, I know how to talk. I also need to turn that around and listen and hear what is being said and try to see where I can be of some use in the team. I say of some use because roles change. My role in Leslie may be different than my role in Hazlitt, depending on what the needs are. I have lots of skills, but I don't know which skills to apply until I know where they're needed. You know, there's someone, you know, I've been the spokesperson for Leslie because I'm pretty good at it, but maybe someone in Hazlitt's a lot better at that than I am. And maybe there's another role that I need to serve here. I need to, in that first 100 days, and I don't want to be nebulous here, but I need to have a clear understanding of vision, and if there isn't a clear understanding of what the vision is for this district, because although maintaining excellence is worthy, in order to maintain excellence, you can't stand still. So we have to, we, the board, we, the administrative team, we, the teachers and community, have to figure out what is it that we have to do more of differently in order to maintain that excellence, because the target's always moving. So that's, you know, there's not a grand plan, I'm going to come in and do this and do that, because you've got such a great thing going here. It's how is it I can be helpful in maintaining that, and I'm sure there are some ways I could do that. I just don't know what they are yet.
Okay, I do apologize. I got something in my left eye, and it's just driving me nuts. And I think I rubbed it, and I shut it, and it's worse, and it's just driving me nuts.
Phil, I hope you can appreciate that was said in jest.
No, it's just driving me nuts.
I'm sorry.
Anyway, I get the last question, and so you can, one more, and you can breathe a sigh of relief. This one is kind of a broad question. It allows you to reflect on all your accomplishments, particularly at Leslie, and kind of focus on what you have done to make Leslie a more effective district.
Well, I think in short, I think for once I'll have a relatively short answer. In the 4 years that I've been superintendent, our MEPS scores have gone up. Our fund equity has gone up. Our enrollment has gone up. And I have helped create a stable environment where there was none. I don't know how many of you know how many superintendents they've been through prior to my tenure for the last 4.5 years. But they've had some stability, they've had some maturity, they've had some conscious thought about moving ahead. And in every measurable way that I know, when you come and look at my district, you will find all of those things. Are we perfect? Far from it. But we're everywhere, we're heading in the right direction. When school districts in this next year struggle and the year after, Leslie will be able to hang on while other districts will be going under, and somebody will have to solve the problem before we are faced with such a serious problem. And we're not going to be one of those that's going under. Our scores are going to continue to go up because there's a plan, there's a professional development plan, it's all in place. And so what I've offered is a stability. We've had a stable administrative staff, they're loyal, we work together well, and as a result of that stability, we've been able to move forward and get a lot done. So,
Okay. Well, you can take a few seconds here for yourself and reflect back on the questions, but at this point, you have a chance to make a statement to the board about yourself or anything you want to add, and you can then direct any questions to the board that you may have.
well, I'm sure, because because those things get around, I'm sure you know that I visited several of your schools last week. Out of respect for your middle school and high school principal, I did not visit those schools. I know they are professional, and I know they would have welcomed me, but it just was personal. I did not visit those schools, but I visited Wilkshire, I visited Meridian High, I visited Murphy. And what I discovered was across the board. I talked to a kindergarten parent, Claudia, I think it's B, I'm not positive if that's how it's pronounced. She told me about the helpfulness of Bob Hewitt. I told her I didn't believe everything I heard. No. Bob and I talked for a little while. The small class sizes, the parent-teacher conferences. Last name Schumacher said, and the first name I'm not even going to begin to, she said it was a joyful place. Deb Woodworth, you know, when you drive in the parking lot in the morning, it's a good day. She believed that people come here and live here because of the school system, because the school system is the community. Diane Lindbergh appreciates Sharon so much. She said she knows best practice and curriculum. She gets things done. And parents again. Parent volunteers. And a school board that's very approachable. Steve, is it Koski? Say it again. Kioski. Talked about the sense of team. Lack of segregation by employee status. The people he works with and the sense of pride in the district. Brenda Monroe talked about the pride and the sheer number of parent volunteers. She loves her job at Wilkshire. And this was funny, she quipped with a big smile, and besides, at any other school they'd be taller than me. I asked many people what they wanted in a superintendent. I already mentioned to you what Patty said, wanted to maintain excellence. Deb wanted an open door policy, a person who was out of the buildings and in attendance at sporting events and art events. The administrators want Bob, but they can't have him, so they want to be treated with respect, allowed to do their job with input, not interference. They want to be held accountable. They want to be provided support. They want leadership with vision, a collaborative atmosphere. And this is a Bob quote, let's see what we can do attitude. Someone who supports alternative learning styles. Steve said he wants fairness, leadership with someone who encourages. Aaron Looney, teacher at Meridian High, wants someone who listens. Sam Bird said he wants a down-to-earth guy, and I'm sure he meant by guy, he meant that in the figurative sense. Greg Shook wanted someone who was going to support his program. And what I would just submit to you as just a final statement, everything that's listed here, I can provide your district.
Okay. Any questions for us?
No, not at this time.
Well, Mr. Howe, we really appreciate your interest in the superintendent of Hazlet Public Schools. We're going to be continuing our interviewing for the rest of the week, and then when we get to that decision, we'll keep you posted on our decisions after that.
Great.
Okay?
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Everybody's starting to cough.
Yeah.